We'd like to bring up the concept of discipline because this word holds a history of profound influence on the way we raise our children, often without us even realizing it.
Well, when we hear the word discipline, people think of consequences, of punishments, pain, or fear. They think of making something that doesn't feel pleasant. That's the meaning that has become ingrained in the adult mind over centuries.
But the word discipline comes from Latin, disciplina, that means teaching, giving guidance, the process by which someone who knows more about something guides someone who knows less. Those are the origins of the word discipline. With this new definition, maybe we can separate it from the negative concepts and feelings.
Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We replaced teaching with control and guidance, with consequences painful enough that, we thought that the child would never want to experience them again. And that shift has had really high costs for children, for relationships, and as neuroscience now shows us, for brain development as well.
Setting clear and consistent boundaries is one of the greatest acts of love a parent can offer. A child without boundaries is not free, rather they are adrift. A certain amount of structure is necessary. So let's talk about where boundaries come from. As adults, it's important to know whether they come from fear or from love. This distinction shapes our guidance as parents and will help determine what kind of adult the child will become.
We know this is a topic that sparks strong emotions. Some may be thinking of strict discipline with strong beliefs from the past. Others are going through a really tough week with a young child who seems determined to push every boundary set for him. And others have already decided that punishment isn't an option, but they aren't sure what to do instead. Whatever your situation, you're welcome here. We're here honestly to share information of what has worked for us, what the costs can be, and what the research says about the long term.
First, we need to talk about why children behave the way they do. Because we know that much of the frustration parents feel, why don't they listen to me? Or we've been through this 1,000 times. The feeling that nothing gets through to them stems from expecting children to do something their brains aren't yet ready for.
This is the part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, and it's responsible for controlling impulses, planning ahead, understanding consequences before they happen, regulating our emotions, feeling empathy, and making decisions based on long-term outcomes.
In children, the prefrontal cortex is still developing. Researchers have found that this part of the brain is the last to develop. It begins its growth around the age of 4 or 5, and it doesn't finish developing until a person reaches their mid-20s.
Think about what that means. For a 2-year-old in the middle of a meltdown, we ask them to regulate an emotion, control an impulse, respond to reason, all at the same time, when their brain is not neurologically ready to do any of those things yet. That means it's not defiance or manipulation or any other adult interpretation of it. It's just a 2-year-old brain doing its best to handle overwhelming emotions.
This is the part we need to internalize. Punishment, designed to cause pain or scare a child, activates stress, flooding the system with cortisol and triggering survival mode. When the brain is in this mode, it causes the prefrontal cortex to shut down completely. The very part of the brain we're trying to develop is the one that shuts down in the face of a threat. This seems kind of contradictory, don't you think?
So when we punish harshly, and we may be stopping the behavior temporarily, because fear causes a momentary offline mode, but we're not building the capacity to make better choices next time.
The findings of research on children who have been subjected to severe and repeated punishment, physical punishment, extreme humiliation, prolonged isolation, are very, consistent. Their prefrontal cortex is measurably less developed than that of a child who's been disciplined in other ways. They have less ability to control their impulses, to feel empathy, and less capacity for the kind of complex moral reasoning that we really want to foster. Severe punishment does not build character, it damages the organ that shapes it.
Quick pause here to clarify. We're not talking about parents who lose their patience occasionally or that raise their voice on a hard day. The occasional rupture followed by repair is part of the very real relationship, and children are very resilient to that. But what the research tracks is patterns, and it is those chronic conditions that shape the development of the child's brain.
So let's talk about the difference between discipline driven by fear and discipline driven by love. In short, fear works in the short term, but love works in the long term. We need to be realistic about this. Fear-based discipline works. It stops the behavior immediately. The child gets scared, and scared children obey. But obedience born of fear is very different from the behavioral change that comes from becoming aware. And those two paths lead to very different outcomes.
A child who stops hitting his brother because he fears the consequences hasn't learned that hitting causes pain. What he has learned is that hitting causes him pain. That makes right. And as soon as the pain goes away, and when no adults are watching, or when he's old enough that punishment doesn't scare him, the behavior returns, because that deep understanding, that conscience was never truly built.
Love-based discipline may seem to take longer, and it may demand more from the parents and caregivers. It requires staying calm, getting down to the child's level, explaining multiple times. It requires trusting in a process that doesn't yield immediate results. But what it creates over time is a child who has genuinely internalized the values you're trying to teach them. A child who can be autonomous and also truly wants to be empathetic and considerate, who trusts their own conscience, who knows what it means to hurt someone and why it matters not to do so.
The goal of discipline is not to have an obedient child, but for the child to internalize values, awareness, and a moral compass that they can carry with them without needing an adult to impose it on them. Fear creates submission. However, teaching builds character and strengthens connections, and every moment is an opportunity to make a different choice.
Let's be practical now, because we know that a lot of what we've said so far sounds right in theory, and then a toddler refuses to put on shoes at 7:45 in the morning and the whole framework disappears. So let's talk about what this actually looks like in real life. When you're tired and late and your child is in full collapse over something that seems completely irrational.
The first thing, and maybe the hardest, is to regulate yourself before you try to regulate them. You cannot co-regulate from dysregulation.
The second thing is to get curious before you give a directive. When a child is melting down, or inconsolable, or completely unreasonable, take into account that something has been overwhelming or frightening or causing pain, or simply they're exhausted. The meltdown is information. Before you try to stop it, try to understand it. What is happening right now? What does he need? Not what do I need them to do, what do they need?
The third thing is to set the limit clearly and warmly at the same time. And this is where positive discipline gets confused with permissiveness. You need to put limits that are set with empathy and validate their feelings. Hold the limit while acknowledging the emotion. I know you don't want to leave right now. I hear you and I understand you. We're leaving in 5 minutes.
The fourth step is to prioritize the natural consequences of their actions. In other words, when a child breaks something, hurts someone or makes a bad decision, the important thing is for them to realize the consequence of the action itself. For example, if they break something that was valuable to you, you show them that you feel sad about that broken object. If they hurt a friend, they help make amends by apologizing or even compensating the friend accordingly. The consequence arises directly from the behavior, and that connection is what leads to true understanding.
And the fifth is repair. After every difficult moment, every time you didn't handle it the way you wanted to, you try again. And you say to your child, "That was hard. I didn't handle it very well. I love you." Repairing is the most powerful thing you can teach them because it shows them that relationships survive difficult moments and that love endures despite circumstances. Your love has no conditions, and there is no such thing as a permanent disconnection. You can always go back and fix it.
We need to address a delicate topic that can probably pop up in the comments: the use of physical punishment. Spanking, hitting, any form of pain inflicted on a child as a disciplinary measure is deeply embedded in many cultures and in many families across the world who themselves were raised this way. We hear this often: "I was spanked and I'm okay." We hear it without judgment. We just want you to reflect on what research outcomes show.
By now, there's a vast amount of research on physical punishment, more than 5 decades of research conducted across diverse cultures, consistently reaching the same conclusions. Physical punishment is associated with increased aggression. It is linked to poor mental health outcomes. It damages the parent-child relationship, and it doesn't lead to long-term behavioral changes. And it teaches children that powerful people resolve conflicts by harming the less powerful.
We understand the exhaustion, the feeling that nothing is working, the desperation. We have compassion for those moments. We know they are real, and we intend to be part of giving parents more tools, options, and perhaps understanding of why the behavior is happening and what actually addresses it.
The world is moving away from corporal punishment. More than 60 countries have legally banned all forms of corporal punishment against children. More and more families want to raise their children differently from how they themselves were raised. They deserve support and information.
There is a concept the psychologist Laura Markham uses that we find very useful. She calls them hot buttons. The specific behaviors in your child that do not just frustrate you, they flood you. They take you from 0 to overwhelmed in seconds.
Every adult has them, and they're almost always connected to something from our own past. A behavior in our child that mirrors something that makes us lose control.
When those buttons get pushed, when you find yourself overreacting, that is also information to pay attention to. The practice of positive discipline includes learning to recognize those moments that have to do only with you. It's not always easy to stop the reaction, but increasingly, over time, you start to feel them coming. You start to have a small window between the trigger and the response. And in that window, you have a choice.
That window is where conscious parenting lives. In the moments right before you would have reacted the old way, that is where the work is. And it's genuinely hard, but also it gets easier over time. Not easier in the sense that you forever stop getting triggered, but easier in the sense that you start to know yourself better. And knowing yourself is how you stop passing on unprocessed history to your children.
We'd like to conclude this section on research with a long-term perspective. Children raised with positive discipline, with clear boundaries, warm empathy, natural outcomes, and consistent repair over conflicts. What does the research reveal about the kind of adults they grow up to be?
They show higher levels of self-regulation. They can manage their own emotions better as they grow older because they experience co-regulation rather than the withdrawal of it. They show higher levels of empathy because empathy was modeled for them and experienced by them, not just explained to them. They show better outcomes in peer relationships. They're more likely to resolve conflict without losing control, and they show higher moral development and more likely to act ethically because they show better outcomes in peer relationships. They are more likely to resolve conflicts without losing control. They show higher moral development and they are more likely to act ethically because they have genuinely internalized why it is important.
And perhaps most meaningfully for the relationship itself, they are more likely to stay in genuine communication with their parents through adolescence and into adulthood because the relationship was built on trust and respect rather than fear. And that trust survives through the years.
We've been talking about what positive discipline looks like when it's done right. But there are ways to get it wrong as well, and we're sharing honestly from our heart.
There were times when I lost my patience with my children. I said something harsher than I intended, or my frustration came out in a blunt way. And the most important thing I learned from all of that was to be kind to myself and to recognize that it's a learning process and that it's possible to make amends.
I remember an incident with my son. He was about 7 or 8 years old where I didn't handle the situation well. I lost control of my emotions. I was very harsh with him. His little face showed shock and fear, and it was as if he didn't know who I was. Our relationship was affected for days. I didn't know quite how to fix it yet. I had a really hard time explaining my actions, even though I knew it was the only way to repair. 2 days later, I gathered the courage and I approached him to explain humbly. I didn't handle the situation well. In that moment, I wasn't the mother I want to be. I'm sorry and I love you.
And what did he say?
He looked at me for a moment and then he said, "Oh, it's okay, Mom." I was being kind of difficult too. And we both hugged, and later I realized that he was doing exactly what I had just shown him. Acknowledge, repair, and move on.
And that is the thing about repair that never stops being true. Your children learn how to do it by watching you do it. Every time you go back to them, reconnect, every time you say, "I got that wrong," or "I can improve," they learn this important relationship skill. With everything we've discussed today, we just can't emphasize enough how important it is that boundaries are always set with love. Whenever your child does something that requires a response, whether they've crossed a boundary or need to change their behavior, take a moment to breathe, center yourself. Before reacting, ask yourself, how can I guide him with love?
Guiding with fear looks like, I need this to stop right now, and I'm going to make it stop at any cost. The child's experience takes a secondary place. You're only focused on putting an end to it.
On the other hand, guiding with love looks like, this is an opportunity. I want to teach them something. I want to set this boundary without harming the relationship, because the relationship is what makes us willing to listen.
Both approaches produce short-term results, but only discipline combined with love ensures that the child truly internalizes their values, behaves well because they understand why, and above all, turns to you when things go wrong because they feel the relationship is strong and loving.
Everything we talked about today, some neuroscience, the distinction between punishment and guidance, the tools, the research on long-term outcomes, all of it is in our book, Criar con el Corazón, now available on Amazon.
Next time, we're going to talk about breaking the cycle, starting with ourselves, how our own childhood shape the way we respond to our children, and whether any of it can actually change. Thank you for being the kind of parent who asks these questions. We will see you then.